During the season of Advent and Christmas, we speak a lot about Jesus and about Mary, his mother. And there's one person that we seem to kind of leave in the background, and that is St. Joseph. And I thought today it would be good for us to reflect on what St. Joseph can teach us. St. Joseph valued the treasure of silence for the first thing. Secondly, from him, I think we can learn that actions speak louder than words. And finally, that when we are under pressure, we have to rely on the power of God. He did those things extraordinarily well. First of all, the treasure of silence. There's not one word that was spoken by St. Joseph that's in the sacred scriptures. Not one word is recorded that he spoke. He must have been a very quiet man. And yet, St. Joseph, in the silence that he went through, teaches us a lesson. He was faced with problems he didn't expect, and yet he just simply did what God asked him to do. Jesus said later on in the gospel that it's not whoever cries out, "Lord, Lord," will come to my kingdom, but those who do the will of my Father. And I wonder if he didn't learn those words. Thinking of those words, he was thinking of his foster father, St. Joseph. He was one who did the will of the Father. He didn't know what to do when he discovered that Mary was pregnant. And he was just concerned, very concerned. And he thought of what he might do. But then in a dream, an angel tells him, as we read in the gospel today, that don't be afraid to take Mary to be your wife and take her into your home, because the child that she's conceived has been conceived by the power of the Holy Spirit. And you're to name him Jesus, because he will save people from their sins. Joseph woke up and did as the angel spoke to him. He valued the treasure of silence and then did what God asked him to do. Actions speak louder than words. St. Joseph, by his actions, shows us how to follow God's will. He was in a very difficult situation. At the time, young people got betrothed, and we would call that engagement today. But betrothed meant that they were legally married. If they were to separate, they needed a decree of divorce. And so, but for the first year after being betrothed, they did not live together. And so it's during that time that Joseph discovers that Mary is expecting a child, and he knows that the child is not his. What he does, though, as I just said, in obedience to the angel, he does God's will by taking Mary to be his wife. And so today, then, we see that he, under pressure, Joseph under pressure in many situations like this one. And secondly, the census comes up, the mandatory census, and he has to travel with Mary to Bethlehem. She's about ready to deliver her baby. They don't have a place to stay. What's he going to do? And they end up, as we know, in the stable, and the crib for the baby is the food trough that the animals eat out of. Joseph is still just doing what God called him to do. And then after that, he finds out that Herod wants to kill all the baby boys that are 2 years old because he's afraid that among them is a rival king. And so he wants them all murdered. So Joseph takes Mary and the child, and they flee to Egypt, to a land where they don't understand the language, and they just wait in silence there until they're told to go back home to Nazareth. And then when they lose Jesus in the temple, under pressure, imagine, you parents know what it's like when you don't know where your child is. And 12 years old, they were very, very frustrated and worried and frantically searching for him. But like in all instances, Joseph relied upon the power of God to take care of this situation, and he did. And it teaches us that God gives us his strength. Sometimes we can see our lives as one crisis after another. And yet we look to Joseph and see he was faced with that, but he relied on the power of God for just this day, what he had to do. this hour what he had to do. And I think that's a good lesson for us. We live in a hectic world where there's lots of noise and distractions. And sometimes we say, I pray to God, but I'm not getting an answer. And maybe the question is, are you being quiet enough to listen to God? It's in silence that we hear God speak to us so often, as St. Joseph teaches us. And so often we too feel the pressure of things going on in life. And we must rely upon the power of God each day too. In 1981, May 13th, you remember, Pope John Paul II, a would-be assassin, shot him, and 3 bullets entered his body. He was in terrible, terrible condition, and miraculously he recovered. And what did he do when he recovered? He went to the prison to visit his would-be assassin. And the cameras of the world were watching. He sat and talked with him. He encouraged him, and he stood up and embraced him. We don't have one recording or anything of what they said to each other, but the whole world saw Pope John Paul doing an act of mercy. Actions speak louder than words, and what he did there. And so it's an example for us that we too have to know that the Lord, the people see us and they see what we do, and they can say there's a Christian person. St. Joseph teaches us these important things, and I hope we pray to him during this week and during the Christmas season that he gives us the strength. He's the foster father of Jesus. He was the husband of Mary, and he's the guardian of the church, one of the most important saints in heaven. And so let us remember to pray to him during this week and in the coming Christmas season.